On what seemed like an ordinary flight from Atlanta to Washington, D.C., a woman boarded quietly, dressed in jeans and a light jacket. She blended into the crowd with practiced ease until a single moment turned her journey into a nightmare. A baseless accusation, a flash of prejudice, and an arrogant response from law enforcement pushed everything to the edge. What none of them realized was that the woman they were humiliating wasn't just another passenger. Her name was Angela Carter, 45 years old, a decorated officer in the United States Army, with over 15 years of service. But more than that, she was a black woman in America raised in a system that too often sees skin color before seeing truth. She had grown up hearing the subtle insults, enduring the watchful eyes in stores, the lowered voices in elevators, the fear masked as politeness. She had learned to smile when judged, to stay silent when cornered, to walk away when disrespected, not because she lacked strength, but because she had to carry it every single day. Angela knew what it meant to be overlooked. She knew what it felt like to have her competence questioned, her intentions doubted, her presence challenged over and over again. She had lived through the kind of quiet cruelty that wears a person down, the type that doesn't leave bruises but leaves scars. Still she rose through the ranks. Still she served with dignity. And still, on that day, in plain clothes and carrying nothing but her crossbody military-issued bag, she became a target once again because someone saw her color before they saw her soul. And so began the story that would remind a nation: injustice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers in uniforms and manifests in silence. Angela Carter stood quietly among the boarding passengers, her shoulders relaxed, her face calm, betraying none of the weight she carried. The soft jacket and simple jeans made her indistinguishable from everyone else, but the crossbody bag embroidered with the U.S. Army logo hinted at a deeper truth. She was a soldier, one who had served her country with honor for over 15 years. That day she was traveling to Washington, D.C. to present a strategic defense project at a high-level military conference. It was a milestone in her career, years of discipline, sacrifice, and silent perseverance finally coming to light. Yet beyond the professional significance, it was personal. As a black woman in a field still dominated by men, often white men, every earned moment of recognition came with an invisible fight, one most people never saw. She had worked twice as hard to be seen as equally capable. She had stayed late, volunteered for the hardest assignments, and swallowed comments that would break the spirit of anyone less resolved. This presentation was not just a report. It was her way of saying, "I belong here. I've always belonged here." As she approached the gate, Angela glanced around, not in fear, but with awareness. It was a habit she had developed over time, because when you're a black woman in uniform, people often admire the badge but still question the person wearing it. That morning she wasn't wearing her uniform. And sadly, in this country, sometimes that makes all the difference. As Angela Carter stepped onto the plane, she felt the familiar weight of scrutiny. Though dressed in civilian clothes, her presence seemed to draw unwarranted attention. She found her seat, placed her military-issued bag in the overhead compartment, and settled in, attempting to focus on the defense project she was to present in Washington, D.C. However, the atmosphere shifted when a middle-aged white woman seated nearby began to whisper to a flight attendant, casting suspicious glances toward Angela. Moments later, an airport security officer approached her, his demeanor cold and authoritative. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said. "We've received information that you may not be on the valid passenger list. Please leave the aircraft so we can verify." Angela was taken aback. "I have a ticket and went through security." "Is there a problem?" she inquired, her voice steady. The woman interjected, her voice laced with accusation. "She looks like the criminal I saw on TV last week. I'm sure it's her." A surge of disbelief and indignation coursed through Angela. "Criminal? I don't understand why you would say that," she responded, striving to maintain her composure. The security officer's tone grew sterner. "Please leave the plane." Angela stood her ground. "I am a U.S. military officer with a valid ticket en route to an important meeting. If there's any issue, it should be verified before asking me to disembark." Her words fell on deaf ears. The officer's expression hardened. "I don't care who you are. You're currently disrupting this flight. If you don't comply, we will be forced to take drastic measures." The eyes of fellow passengers bore into her, some filled with curiosity, others with judgment. Angela felt a familiar sting, the pain of being misjudged based on her appearance, the frustration of having to prove her legitimacy in spaces where she belonged. She clenched her fists, a silent testament to her resolve. "You have no right to remove me from the plane without good reason," she asserted. "I demand that you verify the information before acting like this." The officer sneered. "Don't make things difficult for everyone. It's hard to believe someone like you is on this flight. Who do you think you are?" Angela scanned the cabin, hoping for support, but was met with averted gazes and silent complicity. The flight attendant attempted to intervene, suggesting a more careful review, but was quickly silenced by the officer's authoritative command. As the situation escalated, one of the security guards placed his hand on his belt, where his gun rested. "Are you getting off the plane now?" he demanded. Angela knew that resisting could lead to a dangerous confrontation, yet acquiescing felt like a betrayal of her dignity. "I'm not going anywhere," she declared, her voice unwavering. "If you want me to leave, you need a valid reason and proper verification." Instead of listening, the officer shouted, "I don't need to verify anything. You need to cooperate now." Faced with an unjust ultimatum, Angela made a choice. She slowly stood up, her eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and determination. "Fine," she said, her voice even but forceful. "I will go, but I will make sure you are held accountable for this." As she was escorted off the plane, the cabin fell into a heavy silence. Some passengers whispered, others turned away, but none spoke up. Angela walked with her head held high, embodying the resilience of countless individuals who have faced similar injustices. Inside the airport's security room, Angela Carter sat upright in a cold plastic chair, her back straight, hands calmly resting on her lap. Her face was composed, but her eyes sharp and steady reflected a storm of quiet fury. Across the room, two security officers stood by the door, exchanging idle words with each other, pretending she wasn't even there. The room was silent except for the ticking of a wall clock. With every passing second, Angela felt the weight of insult and injustice sink deeper into her chest. She had been removed from a plane, not for something she had done, but for something she looked like. And in that room, she wasn't seen as a military officer or even a citizen, just a threat to be contained. "We're keeping you here until we have more information," one officer muttered, not even bothering to meet her gaze. Angela's voice cut through the cold air. "You haven't asked for my identification. You haven't verified anything. What gives you the right to detain me?" The officer shrugged. "We're just following procedure. Cooperate, and this will go easier for you." "Cooperate?" she said, a bitter laugh slipping out. "You insulted me from the moment I boarded. This isn't protocol. It's power abuse. You're violating my civil rights." An older officer entered the room then, sizing her up with a smirk and narrow, dismissive eyes. "Who do you think you are, talking like that?" He scoffed. "You don't look like a soldier, you look like someone who causes trouble." Angela met his gaze without blinking. "I think it's people like you who make law enforcement look bad. You're in no position to demand anything," he barked. "Just sit back and wait." She crossed her arms, unshaken. Her voice remained calm, but each word was firm, planted deep like roots. "I'm not just speaking for myself. I'm standing for every person who's been silenced by people like you." The tension in the room was thick when the door suddenly opened again. A man in uniform entered, a middle-aged officer with a sharp presence. The badge on his chest read Captain Samuel Bryant, the airport police chief. "What's going on here?" he asked, voice measured but clearly unimpressed. One of the guards quickly gave a version of the story, placing the blame on Angela for being uncooperative. But Captain Bryant turned to her and introduced himself calmly. "Ma'am, I've been told you refused to comply and caused a disturbance. May I ask for your ID?" Angela looked him straight in the eye. "Before asking me to leave that plane, did anyone verify who I was? Did anyone listen to what I said? Or did you just act on a stranger's accusation because of the color of my skin?" That made Bryant pause. He glanced at his officers, then looked back at her, clearly troubled by what he heard. "I'd like to see your identification, please." Without hesitation, she reached for her wallet and handed over her military ID. His face changed as he read the name, Captain Angela Carter, United States Army. The weight of the truth settled in the room. I'm sorry," he said, visibly uncomfortable. "I didn't know you were military." Angela stood up. "Who I am shouldn't matter. What matters is how you handled this. No one verified. No one asked. You just acted, and you humiliated me in front of an entire plane of people. Bryant turned sharply to the guards. This is a serious breach of protocol. You should have verified her ID the moment there was doubt, not escorted her off like a criminal. Silence filled the room. Angela Carter had been forced off the plane in silence. No explanations, no proper verification, just suspicion cloaked as procedure. Now, she sat in the sterile security room, where cold fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and authority hid behind indifference. No one had checked her ID. No one had asked a single real question. A guard with folded arms and a sneer on his face muttered, "You look like the kind that causes trouble." Angela didn't flinch. Her voice was low but carried the weight of 1,000 humiliations endured by those who came before her. "I want to speak with someone in real authority." Moments later, the door creaked open, and in walked Captain Samuel Bryant, airport police chief, middle-aged, with a stern face that revealed little. He stood straight, listening first to his subordinates, who framed her as non-compliant, disruptive, everything she was not. Then he turned to Angela, addressing her with formal restraint. "Mom, I've been told you caused a disturbance and refused to cooperate. May I ask for identification?" Without hesitation, she reached into her jacket and handed him her military ID. The room seemed to pause as he read the card, "Captain Angela Carter, United States Army." The words hit him visibly. His posture shifted, his face softened with recognition and regret. "Miss Carter, I apologize," he said, his voice quieter now. "I didn't know you were a military officer." Angela stood, her spine straight, eyes sharp. "What you didn't know isn't the issue. It's what you and your team failed to do. You didn't ask. You didn't verify. You humiliated me without cause." Bryant lowered his eyes for a brief second, then turned to his officers. "You violated procedure. That's not how we handle anything, let alone a fellow officer." And just like that, the room shifted. The weight of what had happened began to settle. But for Angela, it wasn't relief, it was the beginning of a fight for accountability. Angela Carter didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Standing tall in that sterile room, her words landed with quiet force. "The issue isn't who I am. The issue is how you acted. No verification, no questions, only prejudice and procedure twisted into power." Her tone was steady, but it carried generations of disappointment. Too many moments where black voices were silenced, dismissed, or ignored unless they came with a uniform and a badge. Captain Bryant said nothing at first. Then he requested the surveillance footage from both the boarding gate and the plane. Everyone watched in silence as the truth unfolded on screen. Angela remaining calm. The baseless accusation, the failure to check her ID, and the officers escalating without cause. When the video ended, Bryant turned to her, visibly shaken. "You're right," he said. "This was wrong. Deeply wrong." He didn't make excuses. He didn't hide behind policy. Instead, he stood before his entire team and issued a public apology to Captain Angela Carter. In front of his staff, he announced the immediate suspension of the 3 officers involved. "This isn't just about one mistake," he said. "It's about a pattern. One that ends today." And though Angela remained composed, a quiet fire burned behind her eyes. Not because justice had fully been served, but because for once, the truth had been seen, heard, and acknowledged. At the press conference, Angela Carter stepped up to the podium. The room was full of reporters, officials, airport staff, and silent witnesses to what had happened. Flashbulbs clicked, but her gaze didn't waver. "I'm not here to seek pity," she began, her voice clear, composed. "I'm here to demand change." There was no anger in her tone, just the calm strength of someone who had seen too much to stay silent. Prejudice doesn't just hurt individuals. It erodes the very idea of justice. It chips away at the trust that communities have in those sworn to protect them. She spoke not just for herself, but for every person who had been wrongly judged, wrongly treated, or pushed aside because they didn't look the part. Her words carried the weight of truth spoken with dignity. When she finished, the room fell quiet for a beat, then applause erupted. Not out of sympathy, but deep respect. In that moment, Angela Carter wasn't just a victim reclaiming her voice. She was a leader calling a system to account. A few weeks later, Angela Carter received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from a 16-year-old black girl she had never met. "I want to join the military, just like you," the girl wrote. "I was scared people wouldn't see me for who I am, but your story showed me I can be proud." Angela smiled softly as she folded the letter. In a world that often overlooked or judged women who looked like her, she had planted something powerful: hope. Though she had endured humiliation and injustice, her strength had lit the path for someone else, and that made everything worth it. Her journey wasn't over. The road ahead would still be long, still be difficult, but she was ready because justice, dignity, and truth would always be worth fighting for. 1 year later, the memory of that flight still lingered, not as a wound, but as a turning point. For Angela Carter, life didn't return to normal. Something had changed, not just in how others saw her, but in how she carried the weight of what she represented. She was no longer just a military officer. She had become a symbol, though she had never asked for that role. Over the past year, she received hundreds of messages, letters from strangers, emails from young recruits, quiet nods of respect in airports and military bases. Some came from fellow Black women in uniform, others from white veterans who admitted they had never fully understood how deep the pain of bias could run until her story made them stop and think. She returned to that same airport once, this time as a keynote speaker at a national conference on equity in public service. The security staff stood in a quiet row as she walked through, not because they feared her, but because they had learned from her. Some looked down, humbled. Others nodded with quiet pride. The young girl who had written her the letter? Her name was Daria. Angela had met her in person last spring. They had lunch at a small cafe near Daria's high school. She remembered the way the teenager's eyes lit up when she talked about her dreams, how she wanted to fly helicopters, how she wanted to lead with honor. And Angela remembered what it was like to be that age, full of hope, yet already too familiar with doubt. Back at her own base, Angela was promoted, not just because of her record, but because leadership recognized something in her they couldn't ignore anymore: quiet courage that speaks louder than rank. She was now in charge of a mentorship program for young officers, especially women of color, ensuring that no one felt alone the way she had that day on the plane. She kept the letter from Daria in her desk, right next to a small frame that held her favorite quote. One her mother had told her as a child: your worth is not decided by what they see. It's defined by how you carry yourself when they don't. That quote had carried her through the silence, the shame, the fight. Now, a year later, the world still wasn't perfect. Bias still existed. But because she stood her ground that day, something shifted. Policies changed. Training programs were rewritten. People paid attention. And in her heart, Angela knew real change isn't loud. It doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it begins in the quietest moments, like when a woman refuses to be erased. Because courage, after all, isn't always about confrontation. Sometimes it's just the choice to stand calm, proud, and unshaken when the world tells you to sit down. This story reminds us how a single act of prejudice can leave lasting damage, not just on one person, but on an entire community. And yet, it also shows that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes silence can be resistance, measured, powerful, and undeniable. So what do you think about this story? What would you have done in her place? And in your opinion, when will racism finally end in our society? We invite you to share your thoughts, because real change always begins with honest, courageous conversations. Note: this story is entirely fictional and created for the purpose of raising awareness. It highlights issues of responsibility, justice, and the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity. We firmly oppose violence, prejudice, and injustice in all forms. Viewer discretion is advised.